There is a number that should stop you cold. The average American household throws away $1,500 worth of food every single year. Not food that went bad before you could buy it. Not food that was damaged in shipping. Food you bought. Food you brought into your home. Food you paid for and then threw in the bin. $1,500 every year, without fail. And here is the part that makes it worse. This is not a discipline problem. It is not a willpower problem. It is not a matter of caring more or trying harder. It is a system problem, or rather the absence of one, because Depression-era families did not throw away food, not a meaningful amount of it, not because they were more virtuous or more careful or more attentive than you are, because they used a system that made waste structurally impossible. 5 rules, written down nowhere, passed between women who learned them from women who learned them from women, and every single one of them applies to your kitchen today, not in theory, in practice. This week, before this video is over, I am going to walk you through all 5, and I am going to tell you exactly when and how the food industry dismantled each one, because they did not disappear on their own. They were replaced, deliberately, by systems designed to make you buy more, store more, and throw away more than you ever needed to. The first rule is the empty shelf rule, and it sounds almost insultingly simple until you understand what it actually required. Nothing new came into a Depression-era larder until what was already there was used. Not mostly used, not nearly empty. Used, the shelf showed empty space before anything filled it again. This was not frugality for its own sake. It was inventory logic. When you know exactly what you have because the shelf is nearly bare, you know exactly what you need. When a shelf is always full, you never truly know what is at the back of it. And what is at the back of it is what goes bad. Depression-era women did not have the luxury of a full shelf acting as a psychological comfort. They had what they had, and they used it completely before they acquired more. The modern supermarket was engineered specifically to defeat this rule. Not accidentally, deliberately. Sylvan Goldman invented the shopping cart in 1937. His stated reason for inventing it was that customers spent less when their arms got tired. A cart removed the physical limit on how much a person could carry. And without a physical limit, people bought more than they needed, more than they could use before it spoiled, more than their larder could sensibly hold. By the 1950s, supermarket design had become a formal discipline. Wider aisles to slow the customer down. Essential items at the back of the store, so you had to pass everything else to reach them. End cap displays for impulse purchases. Buy 2, get 1 offers that created the illusion of saving while guaranteeing you bought 3 of something you only needed 1 of. Every single one of these mechanisms exists to fill your shelf before the previous contents are gone. A full shelf feels like security. It is actually the beginning of waste. The modern application is direct. Before you write a shopping list, open every cabinet and every drawer in your kitchen. Look at what is there. Not a glance, a proper inventory. Write down what you have, then write your list from what is missing. Not from habit, not from what you usually buy, from what is actually absent. Depression-era women did this automatically because scarcity enforced it. You have to enforce it yourself, but the mechanism is identical and the result is identical. You buy less, you waste less, you spend less. The second rule is the nose-to-tail ingredient rule, and this one requires a shift in how you think about what an ingredient actually is. In a Depression-era kitchen, an ingredient was not a single thing with a single use. It was a system of uses layered across time. A chicken was not a chicken breast, and a thigh and a drumstick. A chicken was a chicken breast, and a thigh and a drumstick, and a carcass that became stock, and a stock that became the base of the next 3 meals, and a layer of fat skimmed from that stock that became the cooking medium for the meal after that. 1 chicken, 5 uses. Nothing wasted. The vegetable peelings did not go in the bin. They went in a jar in the cool pantry, and at the end of the week, that jar went into a pot of water with whatever bones were available and became a broth that cost nothing because it was made entirely from what a modern kitchen throws away every day. Stale bread did not go in the bin. It dried completely and was ground into breadcrumbs or crumbled into a soup, as a thickener or soaked in milk and egg, and fried as a fritter that fed the household for another meal. The concept of a single-use ingredient did not exist in a Depression-era kitchen. It was introduced. The processed food industry that took hold after World War II sold convenience, and convenience in food terms meant pre-portioned, pre-prepared, single-use ingredients that required no secondary application and generated no usable byproduct. A can of condensed soup required no stock. A packet of breadcrumbs required no stale bread. A carton of pre-made broth required no carcass. Each convenience product eliminated one layer of use from a whole ingredient and replaced it with a purchased substitute. By 1960, the idea that a chicken carcass was a cooking ingredient had become unfamiliar to a generation of American home cooks who had been sold the idea that cooking started with a can opener. General Mills recorded a 340% increase in processed food sales between 1945 and 1965. That increase was not driven by hunger. It was driven by the systematic replacement of whole ingredient cooking with single-use convenience products. The application today is not complicated. The next whole chicken you buy, use the whole chicken. Roast it, strip the meat. Put the carcass in a pot with cold water, an onion, whatever vegetable odds and ends you have, and simmer it for 2 hours. Strain it. You have stock. That stock is the base of the next thing you make, and the fat you skim, from the top of that stock is the fat. You cook the thing after that in. One ingredient, multiple uses, no waste, no purchase required. The third rule is the weekly ledger rule, and this is the rule that ties the entire system together, because without it, the other rules are intentions rather than practices. Every item that entered a Depression-era kitchen was written down, not in a formal accounting ledger necessarily, sometimes just a piece of paper folded and tucked inside a cabinet door, a running list of what came in, what was used, and what remained. At the end of every week, that list was reviewed. What was left over became the starting point for next week's meals. What was genuinely absent was what got purchased. The list was not built from habit or from a standard weekly shop. It was built from actual inventory. The difference between those two things is enormous. A habit-based shopping list is a list of things you usually buy. An inventory-based shopping list is a list of things you actually need. Most American households operate on habit-based lists, the same items, the same quantities, the same store every week, regardless of what is already in the kitchen, regardless of what did not get used last week, regardless of the half-used bag of rice sitting at the back of the cabinet that has been there for 3 weeks. The food industry understood this and built its entire retail strategy around it. Brand loyalty, repeat purchase cycles, subscription grocery boxes, auto-replenishment services. Every one of these mechanisms is designed to make your purchasing automatic and your inventory invisible. An automatic purchase does not require you to look at what you have, and what you do not look at, you do not use, and what you do not use, you throw away. The application is one piece of paper inside one cabinet door. Write down what comes in, cross off what gets used, look at what remains before you buy anything. That is the entire system. It takes 30 seconds a day to maintain. It will save the average household hundreds of dollars a year in duplicate purchases and spoiled food. Not because you became more organized, because you made your inventory visible. The fourth rule is the cool storage rule, and this one addresses something the modern kitchen has made almost completely invisible: the relationship between temperature, light, and food longevity. A Depression-era kitchen did not have a refrigerator. What it had was an understanding of which foods needed what conditions to last. Root vegetables kept best in cool, dark, slightly humid conditions, a root cellar, a cool pantry corner, a box of sand in a cold room. Dry goods kept best in cool, dry, dark conditions, away from the stove, away from windows, away from any heat source. Cured and preserved foods kept best in cool, consistent temperatures, not fluctuating between warm and cold, but held steady. Fresh produce kept best in cool air circulation, not sealed in plastic, not crammed into a refrigerator drawer, but loose in a cool, moving airstream. Depression-era women understood these distinctions not from a textbook, but from direct observation of what lasted and what did not. They arranged their kitchens around the logic of food longevity. The modern kitchen arranges itself around the logic of convenience and aesthetics. Everything on a bright open counter, everything under warm lighting, everything in a warm room maintained at 68 to 72 degrees year-round. The average kitchen temperature in an American home is 71 degrees Fahrenheit. Onions stored at 71 degrees last 2 to 4 weeks. Onions stored at 50 degrees last 3 to 6 months. The same onion. A temperature difference of 21 degrees. A longevity difference of up to 4 times. Potatoes stored at room temperature begin converting starch to sugar within 2 weeks and become soft and unusable within a month. Potatoes stored at 45 to 50 degrees in darkness last 6 months without any treatment. Garlic, shallots, winter squash, apples, pears, every one of these keeps significantly longer at cool, stable temperatures than at modern room temperature. You do not need a root cellar to apply this. The coolest spot in most homes is the lowest cabinet in the room, furthest from the kitchen stove and any heating vent, a garage shelf in autumn and winter, a basement corner, a north-facing pantry wall. Moving your root vegetables, your alliums, and your dry goods to the coolest available location in your home and away from light will extend their useful life significantly, not as a historical exercise, as a practical response to the fact that your kitchen is too warm for half of what you store in it. The 5th rule is the same-day rule, and this is the rule that the modern refrigerator made obsolete, or rather made seem obsolete, in a way that costs the average household more than any other single change in kitchen practice. In a Depression era, kitchen, anything that was opened, cut, or partially used was finished or preserved the same day, not tomorrow, not later in the week, that day. A half onion did not go back on the shelf. It went into the pot that evening. An open jar of preserves was finished within the week or resealed properly. A cut cabbage was either finished in one meal or the remainder was shredded and put into a brine crock that afternoon to begin fermenting. The rule was not about hygiene, it was about reality. Without refrigeration, a cut vegetable had a lifespan measured in hours, not days. The only options were use it immediately or preserve it immediately. There was no third option. The refrigerator introduced the third option. And the third option, wrapping the half onion in plastic and putting it in the crisper drawer where it would be forgotten until it was unrecognizable, became the default. Whirlpool's internal consumer research from 1987, which was cited in a subsequent marketing strategy document, showed that the average refrigerator contained between 3 and 5 items at any given time that had been there long enough to be inedible. 3 to 5 items, every refrigerator at all times. The refrigerator did not solve the problem of food waste. It delayed it by several days and then concentrated it in a cold box where the waste was invisible until it was too late. The same-day rule applied to a modern kitchen means one thing. When you open something or cut something, decide at that moment what you are going to do with the rest of it. Not later. Now. Is it going into tonight's meal? Is it going into a jar of brine? Is it going into the stock jar in the refrigerator? Is it going to be cooked down and stored? The decision made at the moment of opening is the decision that prevents waste. The decision deferred is the waste. These 5 rules did not require money to implement. They did not require a new appliance or a subscription service or a special product. They required attention and a piece of paper. The food industry generates $1.8 trillion in annual revenue in the United States. A meaningful portion of that revenue depends on you buying more than you need, storing it poorly, and throwing it away before it is used. The $1,500 the average American wastes every year is not an accident. It is the predictable output of a kitchen system designed around purchasing rather than using. Depression-era women did not design their kitchens around purchasing. They designed them around using. Every rule was a mechanism that made use the path of least resistance and waste the path of most resistance. The rules still work. The food in your refrigerator right now does not know what year it is. An onion stored. Cool in the dark lasts 6 months in 2024 for exactly the same reason. It lasted 6 months in 1934. The physics has not changed, only the system around it has. If your grandmother had a particular way of storing food or a rule about the kitchen that she enforced without explanation, drop it in the comments. Those rules had reasons behind them, even when the reasons were never spoken aloud. And as always, until next time.